Welcome to our third Asteria podcast. We're here in the land of the Troubadours. This is our winter home, Langue behind us, and we're here to explore the roots of courtly love in order to understand what the poets were meaning when they were writing about these various themes of chivalry and the lady. In the 15th century, you need to come back here to the 12th and 13th century to really get a sense of what life was like and where these myths arose.
The poetry and the music that was being written here in the 12th and 13th centuries is really extraordinary. Long ballads and stories and exchanges even between dialogues between people in song. And it's very, very rich and exciting for us to take a look at this source.
And of course, all of this makes a lot more sense if you spend some time here. It's a very different type of terrain than you have in Burgundy, for instance, where the dukes were, or in Belgium. And what you have here is, of course, a lot of wine, which you have seemingly everywhere in France. But the terrain is much drier, and there's a lot more of a sense of craggy, dried-out, mountainous landscapes.
There are some amazing castles on the hilltops, and you realize how self-sufficient these castles had to be and how far they were from anything else that could provide for them. So it was really a kind of a wild life.
So we've got a big program for you today. We're going to show you a little bit of our hometown of Langue, where we've been for the last 2 months and where we'll stay for another couple of months. And we're going to take you to the nearest large town called Carcassonne, where there's an intact medieval citadel. And we're going to take you to one of these troubadour castles. I think we're going to go to Puy-Vert, which is remarkable for the fact that the original salle where musicians would have performed is still there. And this is very, very early compared to the things that we've been looking at in our other episodes and where we'll be later on when we spend more time in Burgundy. So we've got this big program, so let's get started.
Here's our lovely little village of Asteria. It's one of those sweet circular villages that is built around a central church and chateau.
Hey, what's that noise? It's 7 o'clock.
Man, I think that is the church tower. Look, right outside our front door, there's a church. It does this.
It's going to take some getting used to.
I think it is. You know what? I've counted. I think it happens at 7 in the morning and noon and 7 at night. That's matins, lauds, and vespers. And guess what it's asking us to do?
Go back to sleep?
Get up and come pray. Let's get up and see what's outside the window. After all, here we are in Asteria. Oh, wow. Look at that.
Chickens.
Pyrenees. Wow, look at that view. I think that gets me ready for breakfast, personally.
So, what are we going to have?
Well, why don't you go get us some nice fresh baguettes? I'll put on the coffee.
Okay.
Maybe we'll try making one of those beautiful French tarts. Here's our little house. It's a beautiful countryside. Just one step from the front door, we find ourselves in the middle of wine country. There are grapevines everywhere and lovely little flowers, even in the middle of the winter.
Actually, the irony is that it's greener in this part of France in the winter because everyone's growing winter wheat. In the summer, it's so sun-scorched that everything starts turning brown. So it's as if you're in some kind of high spring, even though it's December and January.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And this is my very favorite view of the edge of Asteria. And here is our special spot where we love to sit and look out over the green hills. Maybe it's time to go and explore.
When we first got off the highway coming into Langue, this is what we saw. This is the medieval citadel of Carcassonne, and it's stunning.
This is not just a castle, this is an entire city surrounded by a double wall with a castle and a massive cathedral inside.
And what you're looking at now actually is work that was done to restore the citadel in the 19th century. So it's in a way a 19th century romanticization, but based on the foundations that were there and what remained of the original city walls, some of which go back to Roman times. It's really a very, very ancient place.
Mm-hmm. This is the gate to Carcassonne. You meet some interesting people there.
And you're just blown away being there by how authentic everything feels. It's sort of everyone's dream of a what they call a château fort, a castle, a fortified castle.
This is actually a living city. It's large enough that there are people here leading their daily lives.
Maybe we can show you more of Carcassonne another time. But now we want to take you to a place that's very dear to our hearts, the Troubadour Castle at Puy-Vert.
Puy-Vert is not designed for heavy tourist trade. We had to ascend the mountain on which it perches, rather as they may have had to then. We contemplate the ascent.
Actually, it was a whole lot of fun, if all castles could be like this instead of driving up to them.
You learn a lot more about what it was like to live there.
So here we are. It's a very, very old construction style, so everything's very blocky, not at all like the castles you're used to from Disneyland.
And as you can see, the wear and tear of the years are showing.
And in France, it's interesting that a lot of these chateaux are owned privately, and they are open to the public, and there's some public funds, but not many. So a lot of the upkeep that you would expect just isn't there. So they're essentially crumbling in front of you.
Here is the spectacular donjon. This is the huge central building where the Lord and his family lived. That window up there is very special to us. That is the window of the music room of the troubadour who owned this castle.
Here we are in the actual room behind that window that you just saw. And we were lucky enough to get a moment to sing a few strains.
One of the marvelous things about this room is the high arched ceiling that comes down. Each arch comes down into a carved figure of a musician. And these are carvings from
the 13th century.
13th century. And each one shows very clearly the instrument they were playing. This is musical research at its best. Exactly.
That's a lute right there. Doesn't look exactly like the lute that we're familiar with much later in the 15th century, but it has all the elements. It's all there.
And they're just gorgeous carvings. I love the faces.
One of the neatest things about being at Puy-Vert was to really put ourselves in those positions of the people who live there. What sorts of places would they have sat? What kind of light would they have experienced?
It was such a pleasure to sing in this space with the arches and the high, high ceiling. We had such a feeling of what it might have been to make music there in the past and to sit in the spaces where they sat. And then we climbed out on the roof. Look at this. What a view.
It's amazing how high you are. Actually, this donjon, the keep that we're on the roof of now, is 4 stories high.
Each one very tall.
Exactly. Each one is like a little mini chapel. And in fact, the second story is a chapel.
I loved sitting here imagining what it would be like waiting for someone you cared for to come back, riding over the fields and up the mountain.
And these castles were essentially there for defense, although we couldn't help wondering why an army that was invading your territory wouldn't just walk around it. I mean, you're at the top of the mountain. You have to come down to the plain to defend it. It's an answer
mystery we haven't
it's a mystery
solved.
we haven't solved yet, but it's pretty spectacular being there.